When my daughter told me I wasn't welcome at their house for Christmas, I just nodded and walked out. By New Year's Eve, her husband Bradley was jobless, facing federal charges and begging me for forgiveness, but that was just the beginning of what he had coming. My name's Harold Peterson, I'm 58 years old, and I learned the hard way that sometimes the people you love most will stab you in the back for money. Let me tell you how I got my revenge and my daughter back. I was sitting in Amy's pristine living room, the one I'd helped pay for when she and Bradley bought this place in Kendall Yards 3 years ago. The leather couch I was on, that came from my second mortgage. The 65-inch TV on the wall, my credit card, maxed out because Amy said they needed it for Bradley's professional image. The hardwood floors beneath my feet, another loan against my house because Amy had tears in her eyes when she explained how important it was for Bradley's career. Dad, I was thinking I could make that cornbread stuffing Mom used to love, I said, settling back into the cushions that cost me $3 grand. You know the recipe with the sage that she got from your grandmother. Amy shifted uncomfortably on the matching love seat, not meeting my eyes. She was fidgeting with her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger like she always did when she was nervous. Bradley sat next to her in his expensive suit, checking his phone like whatever was on that screen was more important than talking to his father-in-law. The silence stretched out between us, filled only by the soft hum of their high-end heating system and the distant sound of traffic outside their perfectly soundproofed windows. Everything in this room screamed money, and most of it had come from me. What's on your mind, sweetheart? I asked, though I was starting to get a bad feeling about where this conversation was headed. Amy took a deep breath, glanced at Bradley, then looked down at her hands. Dad, you won't be welcome here for Christmas this year. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been expecting maybe a request to bring wine or asking if I could come early to help set up. Not this, never this. What do you mean I won't be welcome? Bradley finally looked up from his phone, his expression cold and businesslike. It's simple, Harold. My parents are flying in from Boston, and they have certain expectations about holiday gatherings. We need to maintain a specific atmosphere. I looked around the room at all the things my sweat and sacrifice had bought. The granite countertops visible through the kitchen archway that cost me 18 grand on my credit card. The crown molding I'd installed myself because Amy said the house looked unfinished without it. The custom window treatments that had required me to take out a personal loan. Every single thing I could see bore my fingerprints, my sacrifice, my love for my daughter. And now they were telling me it wasn't good enough for their Christmas dinner. And what atmosphere is that? I asked, keeping my voice level. Amy wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Bradley leaned forward, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when he was explaining financial concepts to people he considered beneath him. Look, Harold, it's nothing personal. It's just that my family comes from a certain background. My father is a senior partner at Coleman, Richards & Associates. My mother sits on the boards of 3 major charities in Boston. They're not used to your type of conversation, my type of conversation. I'd raised this girl from nothing after her mother, Linda, died 6 years ago. I'd worked 60-hour weeks running my contracting business to pay for her college, her wedding, her down payment on this house. And now I wasn't good enough to sit at the table I'd helped buy. What exactly is my type of conversation, Bradley? He shrugged like it was obvious, like he was explaining something to a child. You know, talking about construction jobs, complaining about your back, that sort of thing. My parents discuss literature, current events, travel. They summer in Martha's Vineyard. They winter in Aspen. They're educated people. Harold, they expect a certain level of sophistication in their social interactions. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. The complete dismissal of everything I was, everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd sacrificed for this family. I looked at Amy, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her husband he was out of line. Instead, she just stared at her hands, her silence speaking volumes. I see, I said quietly. And where exactly am I supposed to spend Christmas? Maybe with Aunt Beverly? Amy said softly, still not looking at me. Or we could do something the weekend after. The weekend after, like Christmas was just another appointment that could be rescheduled for their convenience. Like 58 years of Christmas traditions meant nothing. Like the fact that Linda and I had hosted Christmas dinner in this very town for 25 years before she died meant absolutely nothing to the daughter we'd raised. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 58 years in my knees and back. Years of hard physical labor that had paid for Amy's comfortable life, years of sacrifice that were now being dismissed because I wasn't sophisticated enough for Boston society. Tell me something, Bradley, I said, my voice still calm. Who paid for this house? His jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his perfectly composed facade. That's not relevant to the current discussion. Humor me. We took out a mortgage like any responsible couple, he said, but there was something defensive in his tone now. And who paid the $60,000 down payment? Amy's face flushed red. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's what I thought. I picked up my coat from the chair where I'd laid it when I arrived an hour ago, back when I still thought I was welcome in this house. Amy, sweetheart, when you figure out who actually acts like family around here, you know where to find me. I walked to the door, past the family photos where my face seemed to get smaller in each frame, past the coat closet full of Amy's designer jackets that cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by the realization that I'd been funding my own exclusion from the family. Dad, wait, Amy called out, but her voice was weak, uncertain. There was no real conviction behind it, no genuine desire to fix what had just happened. I turned around one last time, looking at the two people who had just kicked me out of Christmas. Amy sat hunched over on the couch, still unable to meet my eyes. Bradley had already gone back to his phone, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a minor inconvenience that had been dealt with. Tell your in-laws I said Merry Christmas, I said quietly. I'm sure they'll appreciate the sentiment from someone with my type of conversation. The cold December air hit my face as I walked to my truck, sharp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere inside that house. Behind me, I heard the door close with a soft click that somehow sounded final, like the end of something that had taken years to build and only minutes to destroy. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, engine off, looking at the house that my sweat and sacrifice had helped pay for. The Christmas lights Amy had strung around the windows twinkled cheerfully, mocking me with their festive glow. Through those perfectly clean windows, I could see the warm light of the living room where I was no longer welcome. My phone was already buzzing with texts. Probably Amy trying to smooth things over with empty promises and half-hearted explanations that wouldn't change anything. I didn't read them. Instead, I started the engine and drove home, leaving behind the warm glow of lights from a house where I apparently wasn't sophisticated enough to exist. The drive home through Spokane's winter streets gave me time to think, and thinking was what I did best. 30 years of running a construction business had taught me to plan ahead, to see problems before they became disasters, to understand that every structure needed a solid foundation or it would eventually collapse. This situation with Bradley and Amy wasn't a problem that would solve itself. It was a foundation that had been rotting from the inside, and tonight had just been the moment when the whole thing finally gave way. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for another minute, looking at my modest house. It was a 1970s ranch style, nothing fancy, but it was paid off and it was mine. The front porch light was flickering again, something I'd been meaning to fix for months, but hadn't gotten around to because every spare dollar had been going to Amy and Bradley's lifestyle. The driveway was cracked, the roof needed replacing, and the steps were starting to sag. All things I could have fixed years ago if I hadn't been pouring money into their perfect suburban fantasy. All repairs I'd put off so Amy could have granite countertops and hardwood floors. Inside, the house felt empty without Linda's presence, the way it had every day for the past 6 years. She'd been the heart of our home, the one who made Christmas magical with her cooking and her laughter and her ability to make everyone feel loved. She would have known what to do about Amy. She would have put a stop to this nonsense before it got this far. I walked to my desk in the corner of the living room and pulled out a manila folder I'd been avoiding for months. Bank statements, mortgage papers, receipts, canceled checks, 5 years of financial support that had bled me dry while they lived like royalty. It was time to face the numbers I'd been too afraid to add up. The documents spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Every piece of paper told the same story. Harold Peterson, sucker Harold Peterson, walking ATM. Harold Peterson, the man who loved his daughter so much that he'd let her husband treat him like garbage as long as the checks kept coming. I pulled out my calculator and started with the big items first. The down payment on their house. $60,000 from my home equity loan, taken out against the house Linda and I had worked 30 years to pay off. I remembered signing those papers, remembered how proud Amy had looked when she told me they were buying their dream house. Monthly support, $2,800 every month for 5 years. I'd started sending it when Bradley lost his job at his previous firm, supposedly a temporary arrangement until he got back on his feet. Temporary had turned into 60 months, and the money had become so automatic that I'd stopped thinking about where it was going. The kitchen renovation, $18,000 charged to my credit card when Amy decided her original countertops weren't nice enough for entertaining. I'd maxed out my card for that project, then spent months paying the minimum balance because I couldn't afford more. The wedding, $45,000 that had wiped out my retirement savings. Bradley's parents had insisted on a reception at the Davenport Hotel, complete with a full orchestra and imported flowers. They'd claimed it was important for their social standing, and Amy had begged me to make it happen. By the time I was done adding, the total made me physically sick. $291,000, nearly $300,000. More money than most people made in 5 years, all funneled into the lifestyle of a man who thought I was too stupid and too common to sit at his dinner table. I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers until they blurred together. This wasn't just about money, though. The financial betrayal was staggering enough. This was about respect, about dignity, about the fundamental question of what family actually meant. Linda's life insurance money had gone to Amy's college tuition. My retirement savings had gone to her wedding. The equity in my house had gone to her down payment. And in return, I'd gotten 5 years of gradual exclusion, condescension, and ultimately, complete rejection. The phone rang, cutting through my anger and disbelief. Amy's name flashed on the screen, probably calling to offer some weak explanation for what had just happened. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then Bradley's name appeared on my screen with a text message. "Harold, we need to talk about your behavior today." My behavior, the audacity was breathtaking. I'd just been told I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner after funding their lifestyle for 5 years, and somehow my behavior was the problem. I turned off my phone completely and poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. Tonight felt special enough in all the wrong ways. As I sipped the bourbon, feeling it burn away some of the ice in my chest, I started planning. Not the emotional, fly-off-the-handle kind of planning that gets you in trouble and accomplishes nothing. The methodical, step-by-step planning that had built my business from nothing and kept it profitable for 30 years. Bradley Coleman thought he was smarter than me because he had an MBA from Boston University and wore $1,000 suits to work. He was about to learn that there's a difference between book smarts and street smarts. And when it came to the kind of strategic thinking that could dismantle a man's life piece by piece, I had 30 years of experience on him. The first thing I needed was information, real information, not the carefully curated version of their lives that Amy shared with me. I needed to know exactly what Bradley was doing with the money I'd been sending, where his vulnerabilities were, and what kind of pressure points I could apply when the time came. The next morning, I called my nephew Danny. He worked in IT for the city and knew more about computers, phones, and digital forensics than anyone I'd ever met. When you're planning something delicate, you need the right tools, and Danny could provide tools I didn't even know existed. "Uncle Harold," Danny said when he picked up on the second ring. "How's it going?" "I need a favor, Danny, a big one. What do you need?" "I need to learn how to record phone conversations on my cell phone. Is that legal in Washington?" There was a pause, probably Danny trying to figure out what kind of trouble his uncle might be getting into. "Yeah, it's a one-party consent state. As long as you're part of the conversation, you can record it legally. Why do you need to record conversations?" "Let's just say I might need some evidence of something down the road." Danny was smart enough not to ask too many questions, which is one of the reasons he was my favorite nephew. "Come by the house tonight around 8. I'll show you everything you need to know." By the time I left Danny's house that evening, my phone was equipped with a recording app that would capture every word of any conversation I had. He'd also shown me how to screenshot text messages, how to download and save photos from social media, and how to create encrypted backups of everything. Technology wasn't my strong suit, but I was a quick learner when I was motivated. The next step was research. I spent the following week learning everything I could about Bradley Coleman, and social media made it surprisingly easy. People put their entire lives online these days, apparently never thinking about who might be paying attention. His LinkedIn profile painted a picture of success and ambition. Investment advisor at Meridian Financial Group, graduated magna cum laude from Boston University, member of the Spokane Country Club, volunteer treasurer for the United Way. All very impressive on the surface, but his Facebook page was more revealing. Photos of expensive vacations to places I'd never been able to afford. Check-ins at restaurants where the wine probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Golf weekends with clients at exclusive resorts, all funded, directly or indirectly, by the $200 and $800 I'd been sending every month. Every picture was a slap in the face, but I saved them all to a folder on my computer. Evidence for later. Amy's Instagram was even worse. Posts about being grateful for our beautiful home with pictures of the kitchen I'd paid for. Stories about date nights at expensive restaurants during the same months when I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to make ends meet. A recent post about being excited to host Christmas for family that made my blood pressure spike. But the real breakthrough came when I started digging into Bradley's professional life. A simple Google search brought up some interesting results. Nothing concrete yet, just whispers on financial forums and professional networking sites, complaints about investment performance, questions about fee structures, references to clients who'd lost money following his advice. I made mental notes about everything I found, building a picture of a man whose professional reputation might not be as solid as his LinkedIn profile suggested. There were cracks in the facade, and cracks could be widened if you knew how to apply pressure in the right places. The more I dug, the more questions I had. Why had Bradley left his previous firm so suddenly 3 years ago? Why were there gaps in his employment history that didn't match up with what he'd told Amy? Why did some of his former colleagues seem reluctant to provide LinkedIn recommendations? I started keeping a notebook, documenting every piece of information I found with dates and sources. Old habits from running a business where documentation could mean the difference between getting paid and getting sued. Every contractor learns early that you need to cover yourself with paperwork because people will lie about what they agreed to when money is on the line. The phone calls started the next week. First Amy, then Bradley, then Amy again. Each call followed the same pattern. They were sorry if I'd misunderstood what happened. They wanted to work things out. Maybe we could have dinner sometime soon to talk things over. But nowhere in those conversations did anyone suggest that their Christmas plans might change. Nowhere did anyone acknowledge that what they'd done was fundamentally wrong. I recorded every single call. The first call came 3 days after Christmas. I was sitting in my workshop trying to repair a cabinet door that had been warped for months when Amy's name flashed on my phone screen. I let it ring twice before answering, giving myself time to activate the recording app Danny had installed. "Hello, Amy, Dad." Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who'd sat silent while her husband insulted me. "How are you spending the holidays?" Quietly. "How was your Christmas dinner with the sophisticated people?" There was a long pause. It was fine, but I missed you. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. One thing I'd learned in business negotiations was that whoever spoke first usually lost. "Dad, I think there was a misunderstanding about what happened the other day. Bradley didn't mean anything by what he said. He was just stressed about his parents visiting." "What exactly didn't he mean, Amy? You know about the conversation thing." "He just meant that his parents are very formal people. They're not used to casual talk." "So he did mean it." "That's not, Dad, please, can't we just move past this?" "Family is supposed to forgive each other." "You're absolutely right," I said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Family is supposed to forgive each other. Family is also supposed to stick together. Family doesn't exclude each other from Christmas dinner because they're not educated enough for the in-laws. It wasn't like that. "Then what was it like, Amy? Explain it to me." She sighed, and I could picture her sitting in that expensive living room, probably staring at the granite countertops I'd paid for. "Look, I know Bradley can be difficult sometimes, but he's my husband. I have to think about our future, our marriage. And where do I fit into that future? You're my father. You'll always be important to me. Important enough to invite to Christmas dinner next year." The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. When Amy finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I need to think about it." "No, Amy, you don't. You need to choose, and you've already made your choice." "I just wanted to hear you say it out loud, Dad. That's not fair." "You know what's not fair? Working 60-hour weeks for 5 years to support a lifestyle for people who think I'm too stupid to sit at their table. You know what's not fair? Being treated like a walking ATM by my own daughter. We never asked you for money." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of that statement. "Really? So when you called me crying because you couldn't afford the down payment on the house, that wasn't asking for money? When Bradley lost his job 2 years ago and needed help with the mortgage payments, that wasn't asking for money. That was different. That was family helping family. And this is family helping family too, Amy. I'm helping you learn what respect looks like." I hung up and saved the recording. Amy had just confirmed everything I suspected. She knew exactly what was happening, and she was choosing Bradley's approval over her father's dignity. The next call came from Bradley himself 2 days later. I was expecting this one. Amy had probably told him about our conversation, and his ego wouldn't let him stay out of it. "Harold, we need to talk," he said without any preamble. I activated the recording app. "I'm listening. This situation has gone far enough. You're upsetting Amy with your attitude, and frankly, I'm tired of dealing with it." "My attitude?" "Yes, your attitude. Look, I get that you're hurt about Christmas, but you need to understand the position we're in. I have a career to think about. I have professional relationships to maintain. Image matters in my business, and how do I affect your image, Bradley? You know exactly how. I can't have you showing up at important family gatherings talking about construction work and complaining about your back problems. It reflects poorly on us. On me specifically, the casual cruelty of it was stunning, but I kept my voice level. And why is that, Bradley? Because my colleagues, my clients, they expect a certain level of sophistication from the people I associate with. You're a nice guy, Harold, but you're out of your league with my crowd. It's better for everyone if you just accept that." "I see. And what about the money I've given you over the years?" His tone sharpened immediately. "What about it? We never signed a contract. You gave us that money voluntarily. If you regret it now, that's your problem, not ours. There it was, the truth I'd been afraid to face. So you took my money, but you don't want my company. It's not personal, Harold. It's just business. You helped us get established, and we're grateful for that. But gratitude doesn't mean we have to pretend you fit into our social circle. Actually, Bradley, it is personal. very personal, and it's about to become very much your problem. Are you threatening me? His voice took on an edge I hadn't heard before. I'm informing you. See, unlike you, I don't make empty threats. When I decide to do something, I follow through. Harold, I'm warning you. If you do anything to interfere with my career or my marriage, you'll regret it. I have connections in this city, important connections, I'm sure you do, and I'm sure they'll be very interested to learn about how you've been funding your lifestyle. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been doing some research, Bradley. About you, about your career, about your business practices. You'd be surprised what you can find when you know where to look. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Bradley spoke again, his voice was ice cold. You have no idea who you're messing with. Old man, I can make your life very difficult if you cross me. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Good. Because I'm making you a promise too. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never met my daughter. I hung up and saved the recording. Bradley Coleman had just sealed his own fate, and he was too arrogant to realize it. The next phase of my plan required professional help. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, and I knew I couldn't gather the kind of evidence I needed on my own. I needed someone with expertise in areas where I was completely out of my depth. I found exactly what I was looking for in Marcus Wright, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes and corporate misconduct. His website was professional, but not flashy, and his client testimonials spoke of thorough, discreet work that had helped people recover stolen assets and expose fraud. I called his office the morning after Bradley's threatening phone call. Wright Investigations. This is Marcus. Mr. Wright, my name is Harold Peterson. I need to hire you for an investigation. What kind of investigation, Mr. Peterson? I need you to look into my son-in-law, Bradley Coleman. I have reason to believe he's been engaged in questionable business practices, and I want to know exactly what he's been doing. Can you be more specific about what you're looking for? I explained the situation carefully, leaving out my plans for revenge, but focusing on the financial exploitation and my suspicions about Bradley's professional conduct. Wright listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Mr. Peterson, he said when I finished, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? I want to know everything about Bradley Coleman, his finances, his business dealings, his professional conduct, any legal vulnerabilities he might have. Everything. That's a broad request. What specifically are you looking for? I'm looking for leverage. This man has been taking my money while treating me like garbage. He threatened me on the phone yesterday. I want to know if there's anything in his background that would give me some power in this situation. Wright was quiet for a moment, probably deciding whether I was a legitimate client or someone looking to cause trouble. Mr. Peterson, I have to ask, are you planning to use whatever information I find for any illegal purposes? No. I'm planning to use it to protect myself and possibly recover some of the money I've lost. Everything I do will be within the law. All right? My rate is $150 an hour plus expenses. I'll need a $2,000 retainer to get started, and I estimate this investigation will take about 40 hours of work. It was a significant amount of money, but I'd already spent nearly $300,000 on Bradley's lifestyle. What was another few grand to bring him down? When can you start? I can begin preliminary research this afternoon. I'll have an initial report for you by the end of the week. Wright was true to his word. Friday afternoon, I met him at a small coffee shop in downtown Spokane, away from anywhere Amy or Bradley might accidentally see us. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table, his expression grim. Interesting subject, your son-in-law, he said, keeping his voice low. What did you find? Quite a bit. Bradley Coleman has been playing fast and loose with client money for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I found evidence of unauthorized trades, excessive fees, churning accounts to generate commissions, and at least 3 instances where he moved client funds without proper authorization. My heart rate picked up. Is that illegal? Very illegal. It violates multiple SEC regulations, state securities laws, and his firm's compliance policies. Any one of these violations could result in both civil and criminal penalties. Wright opened the envelope and pulled out several photographs. Your son-in-law also has a serious gambling problem. These were taken at the Northern Quest Casino over the past month. He's there at least twice a week, usually losing significant amounts. I studied the photos, Bradley at poker tables, craps games, slot machines. In every picture, he looked increasingly desperate as the night wore on. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the strain on his face, the tension in his posture. How significant are his losses? Based on what I could observe and some discreet inquiries with casino staff, he's losing approximately $3,000 per week, sometimes more on bad nights. The numbers hit me like a physical blow, so the money I've been sending is probably going straight to cover his gambling debts. Yes, but there's more. Wright pulled out another set of documents, tax returns, credit reports, bank statements that I was able to access through various methods. Bradley Coleman is in serious financial trouble. He owes approximately $180,000 in gambling debts to various creditors, some of them the type of people you definitely don't want to owe money to. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process this information, so he needs my money to stay alive. More than that, without your financial support, Bradley Coleman would likely face bankruptcy, professional discipline from the SEC, termination from his job, and potentially physical harm from his creditors within the next 6 months. And he has the nerve to tell me I'm not sophisticated enough to have dinner with his parents. Wright smiled grimly. Mr. Peterson, your son-in-law is a house of cards waiting to fall down. The question is whether you want to be the one who pushes him over. What would that look like? Wright glanced around the coffee shop to make sure no one was listening, then leaned forward. Well, if someone were to file a complaint with the SEC about his business practices, that would trigger a formal investigation. If someone were to inform his employer about his gambling problem and the potential risk to client funds, that would likely result in immediate termination and a company investigation. If someone were to document the financial exploitation of an elder family member and file both criminal and civil complaints. He didn't need to finish. I could see the whole picture now. Bradley had built his life on a foundation of lies, theft, and addiction. All I had to do was shine a light on the truth. How long would all of this take if it were done strategically, coordinated properly? You could destroy his career and his freedom in a matter of weeks. The key would be timing everything to hit simultaneously, so he couldn't cover his tracks or flee. I thought about Bradley's smug face when he told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for his family. I thought about Amy choosing her husband's approval over her father's feelings. I thought about $300,000 and 5 years of being treated like a walking ATM. Let's do it. The plan Wright and I developed was elegant in its simplicity. We would use Bradley's own arrogance and criminal behavior against him, creating a coordinated attack that would hit his professional and personal lives simultaneously. The beauty of it was that we wouldn't have to fabricate anything or break any laws ourselves. We'd simply expose the truth about what Bradley had been doing all along. The key was timing. Bradley's company, Meridian Financial Group, was hosting their annual holiday party on January 15th. It was a big event with clients, colleagues, board members, and industry professionals in attendance. Bradley had mentioned it several times over the years, bragging about how important it was for his career and his networking opportunities. That party would be ground zero for his destruction. Wright had identified 3 separate avenues of attack that we could pursue simultaneously. First, the SEC complained about his unauthorized trading and client fund misappropriation. Second, a report to his employer about his gambling addiction and the risk it posed to client assets. Third, a civil lawsuit for elder financial abuse, along with criminal complaints for theft and fraud. The trick Wright explained during one of our planning sessions is to time everything so it hits at once. If we file the SEC complaint too early, he might get wind of it and start covering his tracks. If we tip off his employer first, he might resign before the investigation starts. But if we coordinate everything to happen during or right after that holiday party, he won't have time to react. What about Amy? I asked. She's going to be caught in the middle of this. That's something you'll need to decide for yourself, Mr. Peterson. Do you want to warn her beforehand or let her find out when everything else does? I thought about it for a long moment. Amy had made her choice when she chose Bradley's approval over her father's dignity. She'd had multiple opportunities to stand up for me, to show some loyalty to the man who'd sacrificed everything for her happiness. Instead, she'd chosen to enable her husband's behavior. She finds out with everyone else. Over the next few weeks, Wright gathered additional evidence while I worked on my own part of the plan. I needed more recorded conversations, more documentation of their attitude toward me, more proof that they saw me as nothing more than a source of money. The opportunity came when Amy called to suggest we have lunch together. She'd been trying to smooth things over since our Christmas conversation, probably feeling guilty about excluding me from the holidays. I agreed to meet her, knowing it would give me a chance to gather more evidence. We met at a restaurant downtown, neutral territory where she might feel more comfortable talking openly. Amy looked tired when she arrived, stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "Dad, I'm so glad you called back," she said, hugging me when I arrived. "I've been feeling terrible about everything that happened. I know, sweetheart. I've been doing some thinking too." We ordered our food and made small talk for a few minutes. Then I steered the conversation where I needed it to go, activating my recording app under the table. "Amy, I want to apologize for how I handled things with Bradley before Christmas. I was hurt and angry, and I said some things I probably shouldn't have." Her relief was visible, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since she'd arrived. "Oh, Dad, I'm so glad you feel that way. Bradley was hurt too, but he understands that family relationships can be complicated. I'm sure he does. You know, I've been thinking about what he said about my conversations not being sophisticated enough for his family. Maybe he has a point. Amy's eyes widened in surprise. Dad, you don't have to. No, hear me out. Bradley is obviously very successful in his career. Maybe I could learn something from him about business, investments, that sort of thing. Really. I'm 58 years old, and I don't know the first thing about the stock market or financial planning. Maybe Bradley could give me some advice, help me understand his world better. Amy practically glowed with happiness. Dad, that would be wonderful. Bradley loves talking about investments and market strategies. I'm sure he'd be happy to help you understand his business. So tell me, how exactly does Bradley make his money? I mean, what does an investment advisor actually do on a day-to-day basis? Amy launched into an explanation that revealed far more than she probably should have. She talked about Bradley's client base, his investment strategies, his recent successes and failures, but she also mentioned things that raised red flags. Clients who'd been unhappy with their returns, complaints about fees that seemed too high, Bradley's stress about quarterly performance numbers that weren't meeting expectations. He's been working so hard lately, she said, her voice full of concern. Sometimes he doesn't sleep well because he's worried about his clients' portfolios. That's a lot of responsibility, I said sympathetically. I imagine the pressure to perform must be enormous. It is. And he's been having some bad luck at the casino lately. He goes there to unwind after work, but sometimes he comes home more stressed than when he left. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice casual. The casino? That doesn't sound very relaxing. Amy's face flushed slightly. Oh, it's not serious gambling or anything like that. He just plays poker with some business contacts. It's more about networking than the money. Really? Of course. How often does he do this networking? Maybe twice a week. Sometimes more if he's had a particularly stressful period at work. He says it helps him blow off steam and make connections with potential clients. I nodded sympathetically while mentally cataloging every detail. And how much does this type of networking typically cost? I don't really know the details. He handles all our finances. And he doesn't like me to ask about his business entertainment expenses. He says it's just part of the cost of building relationships in his industry. The conversation continued for another hour, with Amy revealing more and more details about Bradley's business practices, his financial stress, and his increasingly erratic behavior. She mentioned late-night phone calls that seemed to make him angry, expensive clothes purchases that he claimed were necessary for client meetings, and mysterious weekend trips that he said were for professional development. By the time we said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, I had enough material to bury Bradley twice over. Amy was giving me ammunition without even realizing it, painting a picture of a man whose life was spiraling out of control while she remained blissfully unaware of the danger she was in. Dad, I'm so happy we talked today, Amy said as we hugged goodbye. This means so much to me. I really think this could be a new beginning for all of us. To me too, sweetheart. Family is the most important thing. As I drove home, I realized that Amy genuinely had no idea what her husband was doing. She thought his casino trips were casual networking events. She didn't know about the SEC violations, the gambling debts, or the threats he'd made to me. In her mind, Bradley was a successful investment advisor who was just a little stressed about work. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The final piece of evidence I needed came from an unexpected source, Bradley himself. 2 weeks after my lunch with Amy, he called me again. This time, he was clearly drunk, which was obvious from his slurred words and rambling speech pattern. Harold, he said, without any preamble, I owe you an apology. I activated my recording app immediately. Do you? Yeah, I do. I was thinking about what I said before Christmas, and I was completely out of line. What specifically were you out of line about? All of it. The stuff about your conversation not being sophisticated enough, about you not fitting in with my family. That was wrong. And I'm sorry, his voice was thick with alcohol and something that sounded like desperation. I could hear ice clinking in a glass, probably whiskey or scotch. Thing is, Harold, I'm in a bit of a tight spot right now. What kind of tight spot? Money problems. Big ones. I've got some debts that need to be paid immediately, and I don't have the liquid assets to cover them. I stayed quiet, letting him dig his own grave deeper with every word. I was wondering if maybe you could help me out one more time, just temporarily, until I can liquidate some investments and get back on my feet. The audacity was breathtaking. 3 weeks ago, he'd told me I wasn't good enough to have dinner with his parents. Now he was asking for more money while drunk dialing me at 11 p.m. How much do you need, Bradley? $60,000, maybe 70, to be safe. $70,000. I know it's a lot, but it's just a bridge loan. I'll pay you back with interest. Whatever rate you want. I just need some time to restructure my portfolio. What do you need $70,000 for? There was a long pause and I could hear him taking another drink. When Bradley spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Gambling debts. I got in over my head with some people who don't like to wait for their money, I see. And if you don't pay them, let's just say it would be very bad for me. And potentially for Amy too. Now he was directly threatening my daughter. Are you saying Amy is in physical danger? I'm saying that these people don't care about collateral damage. They want their money, and they'll do whatever it takes to collect it. Family members, property, reputation. Nothing is off limits. I felt my anger building, but I kept my voice calm and measured. So you want me to give you $70,000 to pay off gambling debts you incurred while insulting me and excluding me from family gatherings? Harold, please. I know how it sounds, but I'm desperate here. These aren't the kind of people you can negotiate with or ask for extensions. You certainly are desperate. Will you help me, please? I'm begging you here, Bradley. I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Did you really think I was stupid enough to fall for this? Did you think you could treat me like garbage for years, take my money, insult my intelligence, exclude me from Christmas dinner, and then call me up drunk at 11 p.m. asking for more money? Harold, please. Did you think I wouldn't figure out what you've been doing with my money? The unauthorized trades, the gambling addiction, the fact that you're one step away from losing your securities license. The line went dead silent. I could hear Bradley's breathing change, becoming more rapid and shallow. When he spoke again, all the fake friendliness was gone, replaced by something cold and dangerous. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I know everything, Bradley. I know about your gambling problem that's costing you thousands every week. I know about your violations at work. I know about the people you owe money to. I know exactly what kind of man you really are. You don't know anything, old man. You're just fishing. I know enough, and soon everyone else will know too. Harold, if you do anything to interfere with my career or my marriage, I will destroy you. I'll make sure Amy never speaks to you again. I'll ruin your business, your reputation, everything you've worked for. I don't think you're in any position to make threats, Bradley. Try me. I have connections you can't even imagine. People who owe me favors, people who can make problems disappear. You're just a washed-up contractor with delusions of grandeur. We'll see about that. Harold, I'm serious. Stay out of my business, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Actually, Bradley, I think you're the one who's going to have regrets. I hung up the phone and saved the recording. Bradley Coleman had just confessed to financial crimes, gambling addiction, making threats against me and my daughter, and owing money to dangerous people. All while drunk and desperate. It was the final nail in a coffin I'd been building for weeks. The pieces were all in place now. Wright had the evidence, I had the recordings, and Bradley had just handed me everything I needed to destroy him completely. The only question left was timing, and I already knew exactly when and where this was all going to come to a head. The Meridian Financial Group holiday party was held at the Davenport Hotel's Grand Ballroom, one of Spokane's most prestigious venues. I'd driven past the building hundreds of times over the years, but never had reason to go inside. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I was walking into the lion's den with enough ammunition to bring down the king of the jungle. I arrived early and positioned myself near the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching the crowd gather. The ballroom was impressive. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, tables draped in white linen with expensive floral centerpieces. Everything designed to project success and sophistication. The kind of atmosphere where Bradley Coleman felt at home. The guest list was exactly what I'd expected. Investment advisors in $1,000 suits, bank executives with perfect teeth and practiced handshakes, clients who looked like they'd never worried about money a day in their lives. This was Bradley's world, the world where I supposedly didn't belong. Bradley arrived at 7:30 sharp, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Amy was with him, looking stunning in a black evening dress that I'd unknowingly paid for through one of his credit card bills. They worked the room like professionals, Bradley introducing Amy to colleagues and clients while she smiled and made small talk. I watched them from across the room, noting how comfortable they both looked in this environment. Amy had learned to play the part of the sophisticated investment advisor's wife, discussing wine selections and vacation destinations with other wives while the men talked business. She'd come a long way from the girl who used to help me in my workshop asking questions about how things worked. Wright was positioned near the entrance, dressed in a server's uniform that gave him access to the entire event without attracting attention. We'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, planning every detail to ensure maximum impact with minimal risk. At 8:45, I made my move. I approached Bradley at the bar where he was holding court with a small group of colleagues, regaling them with some story about a particularly profitable quarter. Bradley, I said, extending my hand with a smile. Good to see you. His face went pale when he spotted me, but he couldn't make a scene in front of his coworkers, Harold. What are you doing here? I thought it was time I met some of your colleagues. Expand my conversational horizons like you suggested. One of the men in the group, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive watch, looked curious about the interruption. "And you are—" "Harold Peterson. I'm Bradley's father-in-law." "Ah, family," the man said, shaking my hand firmly. "I'm William Chen, Bradley's supervisor here at Meridian." "Pleasure to meet you, Harold." "Perfect. I'd hoped to encounter someone in management, but having Bradley's direct supervisor was even better than I'd planned." "The pleasure's mine, Mr. Chen. Bradley's told me so much about his work here at Meridian. Very impressive operation you've got." Bradley's jaw was clenched so tight, I thought he might crack a molar. "Harold, maybe we should find a quiet place to catch up. Actually, Mr. Chen," I continued, ignoring Bradley's obvious discomfort, "I was hoping you could help me understand something. I'm just a simple contractor, but I've been wondering about some investment advice Bradley's been giving me." Chen raised an eyebrow, his professional interest clearly piqued. "Oh, what kind of advice?" I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of screenshots Wright had helped me prepare. "Well, he's been managing some investments for me, and I'm a bit confused about these transactions." Bradley's face went white as I handed my phone to Chen. "Harold, this isn't the time or place for— Now, I'm no expert," I said, speaking loudly enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear, "but these trades seem to have been made without my explicit authorization, and the fees seem quite high compared to what I've seen from other advisors." Chen studied the screen intently, his expression growing more serious by the second. The other colleagues were leaning in now, sensing drama unfolding before their eyes. "Bradley," Chen said slowly, not looking up from my phone, "what exactly am I looking at here?" "It's a misunderstanding," Bradley stammered, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. "Harold doesn't understand the complexities of modern portfolio management strategies." "Mr. Peterson," Chen said, still examining the evidence on my phone, "are you saying these trades were made without your explicit written consent?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, along with several others over the past 2 years. I have documentation going back 24 months showing a pattern of unauthorized activity. By now, other people in the immediate area had stopped their own conversations and were listening to ours. I could see phones coming out, probably recording what was happening. Bradley's carefully constructed professional image was crumbling in real time." Bradley, Chen said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades in financial services. "We need to discuss this privately, immediately." "Mr. Chen," I said, "there's more you should know about Bradley's business practices and personal conduct." I pulled out the small Bluetooth speaker Wright had given me for this moment and connected it to my phone. "I think you should hear this." Bradley's own voice filled the air around us, slurred with alcohol and thick with desperation. "Gambling debts. I got in over my head with some people who don't like to wait for their money. The effect was immediate and devastating." Chen's face went from concerned to furious. The other colleagues stepped back like Bradley had suddenly become radioactive. Conversations throughout the ballroom stopped as people turned to see what was causing the commotion. "My God," one woman whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is that Bradley Coleman admitting to gambling problems?" I played another clip, this one from my lunch conversation with Amy. "He goes there to unwind after work. But sometimes he comes home more stressed than when he left, maybe twice a week, sometimes more." Chen was already pulling out his own phone, speed dialing someone while his face darkened with professional fury. "Security," Chen said to someone on the other end of his call. "I need you in the grand ballroom immediately. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Bradley looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. But there was nowhere to run, not with dozens of his colleagues and clients watching his professional life implode in real time. "You don't understand," Bradley said to Chen, his voice cracking with desperation. "This man is trying to destroy me. He's manipulating the evidence, taking things out of context." "Actually," I said, pulling out the manila envelope Wright had prepared, "I think you'll find everything here is quite accurate and thoroughly documented." I handed the envelope to Chen. "Mr. Chen, your employee has been using financial support from my family to fund a gambling addiction while conducting unauthorized and illegal trades with client funds. I believe that puts your firm at significant legal and financial risk." Chen opened the envelope and began scanning the documents Wright had assembled. Bank records showing the pattern of money flowing from my accounts to Bradley's casino surveillance photos showing Bradley losing thousands of dollars per week. Records of unauthorized client transactions that violated multiple SEC regulations. Documentation of threats made against an elder family member. With each page, Chen's expression grew darker and more professionally outraged. "Bradley Coleman," Chen said, his voice carrying across half the ballroom, "you're terminated immediately, effective this moment. Security will escort you from the premises. You will not return to the office. You will not contact any clients. You will not access any company systems or files. The ballroom had gone almost completely quiet, with only the sound of whispered conversations as people tried to understand what they were witnessing. I could see Amy across the room, her face a mask of shock and confusion as she watched her husband's career die in front of an audience of everyone who mattered in Spokane's financial community.
Mr.
Peterson, Chen continued, his voice still loud enough for the crowd to hear, I apologize on behalf of Meridian Financial Group for the unconscionable conduct of our former employee. What you've described constitutes serious professional misconduct, potential criminal activity, and a clear violation of our fiduciary duty to our clients. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I appreciate your immediate action and professionalism. We will be conducting a comprehensive audit of all client accounts that Bradley had access to, and we will be cooperating fully with any regulatory investigations or law enforcement inquiries. 2 security guards appeared, clearly having been briefed on the situation during their walk to the ballroom. They positioned themselves on either side of Bradley, who still seemed to be in shock at the speed with which his life had just disintegrated. This isn't over, Bradley hissed at me as the security guards prepared to escort him out. You have no idea what you've just done. Actually, Bradley, I know exactly what I've done. I've exposed you for what you really are. As Bradley was led away through the crowd of his former colleagues and clients, many of whom were already pulling out their phones to call their own financial advisors, I saw Amy pushing through the crowd toward us. Her face was streaked with tears, her perfect makeup ruined, her designer dress somehow looking less elegant now that the illusion of her husband's success had been shattered. Dad, she said when she reached me, her voice breaking, what just happened? What was all that about? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and supported, who had chosen her husband's approval over her father's dignity for the past several years. The crowd was still watching us, probably expecting some kind of family drama to cap off the evening's entertainment. That, sweetheart, was justice. I don't understand. The gambling, the unauthorized trades. What does any of this mean? It means your husband is a criminal. Amy, it means he's been stealing from his clients while using my money to fund his gambling addiction. It means everything you thought you knew about your marriage was a lie. The words hit her like physical blows. She staggered backward, caught by one of Bradley's former colleagues who steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. But the money you gave us that was to help us get established, to build our future together. The money I gave you is being funneled directly to casinos and loan sharks while Bradley committed federal crimes with other people's retirement savings. Amy's face crumpled as the full weight of reality hit her. The sophisticated life she'd been living, the social status she'd enjoyed, the financial security she'd taken for granted, all of it built on a foundation of lies and criminal activity. I didn't know, she whispered. I had no idea any of this was happening. I know you didn't, sweetheart. That's why you're not in handcuffs right now, mister. Chen appeared at my elbow, having finished coordinating with security and what I assumed were company attorneys who'd been summoned to deal with the crisis. Mr. Peterson, I want you to know that Meridian Financial Group takes this situation very seriously. We'll be filing our own complaints with the SEC and cooperating with any criminal investigation. If you'd like to discuss potential restitution for your losses, I'd be happy to put you in touch with our legal department. I appreciate that, Mr. Chen. My attorney will be in contact with your office on Monday. As the crowd began to disperse and the evening's entertainment came to an end, I realized that this was just the beginning. Bradley's arrest, the federal investigation, the civil lawsuits, all of that was still to come, but the most important part was already done. The truth was out. The lies had been exposed, and Bradley Coleman's house of cards had finally collapsed exactly the way it deserved to. The aftermath of Bradley's public destruction moved faster than even Wright had anticipated. By Monday morning, Meridian Financial Group had not only fired him, but had begun a comprehensive audit of every client account he'd touched during his employment. By Tuesday, the SEC had opened an official investigation into securities fraud. By Wednesday, the FBI had raided the house I'd helped pay for, seizing computers, financial records, and anything else that might contain evidence of criminal activity. I watched it all unfold from the comfort of my living room, finally able to enjoy the morning news without the stress of wondering how much money would disappear from my account that month. The local stations covered the story extensively, describing it as one of the largest financial fraud cases in Spokane's recent history. My phone had been ringing constantly since the party. Amy called dozens of times, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails as her world collapsed around her. Bradley called too, alternating between threats and desperate pleas for me to somehow undo what I'd set in motion. But there was no undoing the truth once it was out in the open. I ignored most of the calls for the first few days. I needed time to process what had happened, to make sure I was ready for the conversations that were inevitably coming. The plan had worked better than I'd dared hope, but success brought its own complications. The call that finally got my attention came from Wright on Thursday morning. Mr. Peterson, he said, I thought you should know that Bradley Coleman was arrested early this morning. What are the charges? Multiple federal counts. Securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit theft. The FBI has been building their case since we filed the initial complaints, and they moved faster than anyone expected. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, the full weight of what we'd accomplished finally hitting me. How long is he looking at if convicted on all charges? Probably 12 to 18 years in federal prison. The prosecution is also pursuing asset forfeiture, which means they'll seize everything of value to compensate victims. The reality of it was sobering. I'd wanted Bradley to face consequences for what he'd done to me and Amy, but federal prison was a harsh reality that would destroy more than just his career. What happens to Amy? The investigation found no evidence that she knew about or participated in any illegal activity. She's been classified as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. However, she will lose the house and most of their assets as part of the forfeiture proceedings. I thought about Amy, about to lose her home, her lifestyle, and her husband all in the same week. Despite everything that had happened, despite the way she'd chosen Bradley's approval over her father's dignity, she was still my daughter. What about financial recovery for the victims? That's the good news for you. The government has already identified assets worth approximately $1.2 million that can be liquidated for victim compensation. Based on the documentation we provided, you should be able to recover most of what you lost over the years. Most of it? I'd estimate you'll get back somewhere between $220,000 and $250,000. The exact amount will depend on how many other victims come forward and how much the seized assets sell for. It was more money than I'd seen in one place since Linda's life insurance payout. Enough to repair my house, rebuild my retirement savings, and live comfortably without worrying about making ends meet. The knock on my door came Friday evening, just as I was settling in to watch the news coverage of Bradley's arraignment. I looked through the peephole and saw Amy standing on my porch, a single suitcase beside her. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 1 week. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The confident, sophisticated woman who'd sat silent while her husband insulted me was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and broken. I opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. "Dad," she said, and then she broke down completely. I held my daughter while she sobbed the way I'd done when she was a little girl, and the world seemed too big and scary to handle. Some instincts never die, no matter how badly you've been hurt or how justified your anger might be. When the tears finally subsided, we sat on my couch and talked. Really talked for the first time in years. "I didn't know," she said over and over again. "I had no idea what Bradley was doing. The gambling, the stealing from clients, any of it. I know, sweetheart. I thought he was just stressed about work. I thought the casino trips were networking events. I thought the money you were sending was just helping us get established. I was so naive, so stupid. You weren't stupid, Amy. You were trusting. There's a difference." She looked around my modest living room, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The outdated furniture, the walls that needed painting, the carpet that should have been replaced long ago. You spent all that money on us while living like this. It was my choice, but we took advantage of you. I took advantage of you. I let Bradley convince me that you weren't sophisticated enough for our Christmas dinner, that your presence would embarrass us in front of his family. The pain in her voice was genuine, but I needed to hear more than just regret. I needed to know that she understood what had really happened. "Amy, do you remember what your mother used to say about family?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box I kept on the coffee table. "That family isn't about perfection, it's about loyalty and respect." That's right, and it's about standing up for each other, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. I know that now. I should have known it all along, but I let Bradley manipulate me into thinking that social status mattered more than family loyalty. We talked until late into the night, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually having a conversation with my daughter, rather than receiving a performance designed to keep the money flowing. Amy told me about the pressure she'd felt from Bradley to distance herself from me, about the way he'd gradually convinced her that my working-class background was something to be ashamed of rather than proud of. "He made me feel like I had to choose between my husband and my father," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion and regret, "and I chose wrong. I chose the man who was stealing from you instead of the man who had sacrificed everything for me. You chose what you thought was right at the time, Amy. People make mistakes, even big ones. This was more than a mistake, Dad. This was a betrayal of everything you taught me about family and loyalty. I betrayed my own father for a man who was committing crimes behind my back." I reached over and took her hand, noting how thin she'd become, how the stress of the past week had already taken a visible toll. "Amy, I need you to understand something. What I did to Bradley, I didn't do it just for revenge, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it." "What do you mean?" "I did it to protect you, That man was dangerous, and he was going to drag you down with him eventually. If I hadn't exposed him when I did, you might have ended up facing criminal charges yourself or worse. She looked at me with confusion. Worse how? Amy, your husband owed $180,000 to people who don't accept late payments or negotiate payment plans. Do you understand what that means? Her face went pale as the implications sank in. You mean they might have hurt me? They might have killed both of you. These weren't credit card companies or banks we're talking about. These were people who view violence as a legitimate business practice. The full scope of what Bradley had put her at risk for was finally becoming clear to her. Not just the financial crimes, not just the professional misconduct, but actual physical danger that she'd been completely unaware of. So when you destroyed his career, I saved your life and I made sure he'd spend the next 15 years in a place where he can't hurt you or anyone else. Amy was quiet for a long time, processing everything I'd told her. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic, the normal sounds of a Friday evening in a normal neighborhood where husbands didn't owe money to loan sharks and daughters, didn't have to choose between criminals and their families. Dad, I need you to know that I understand now what you did and why you did it. But I also need you to know that I'm ashamed of how I treated you, how I let Bradley convince me that you weren't good enough for our social circle. Amy, we can't change what happened. We can only decide what happens next. What do you want to happen next? I thought about it carefully before answering. This was the moment where we would either rebuild our relationship or let it stay broken forever. I want you to remember who you really are, not the person Bradley tried to turn you into. I want you to remember that your mother raised you to value character over status, loyalty over convenience, family over everything else. I do remember. I lost sight of it for a while, but I remember now. And I want you to promise me that you'll never again let anyone convince you to choose them over your family. Not a boyfriend, not a husband, not anyone. I promise, Dad. I swear to you that I will never make that mistake again. And Amy, I want you to understand that respect goes both ways. I'll always love you because you're my daughter, but trust has to be earned back. That's going to take time. She nodded, tears starting to flow again. I understand. I know I have a lot to make up for. We'll figure it out together. But first, you need to decide what you're going to do with your life now that the fantasy is over. I don't even know where to start. The house is being seized, most of our assets are frozen, and I have about $800 in my personal checking account. You start by getting a job and finding a place to live. You start by building a life based on what you can actually earn rather than what you can convince other people to give you. Would it be okay if I stayed here for a while? Just until I can get back on my feet? I looked at my daughter, this 29-year-old woman who'd lost everything in 1 week and was asking her father for help the way she should have been asking all along. With humility and genuine need rather than entitlement and manipulation, you can stay in your old room for up to 3 months. That should give you time to find a job and save enough money for a security deposit on an apartment. But there are conditions. What conditions? You pay rent. Not much, but something to help with utilities and groceries. You do your share of the housework. You don't bring men here without discussing it with me first. And most importantly, you treat this like the temporary arrangement. It is not a permanent solution to your problems. That's fair, more than fair. And Amy, while you're here, we're going to really talk about what went wrong and how we make sure it never happens again. I'd like that, Dad. I've missed talking to you, really talking instead of just asking for things. As I helped her carry her suitcase to her old bedroom, I realized that this was what I'd been hoping for all along. Not the destruction of her marriage or the imprisonment of her husband, though those things had been necessary. What I'd really wanted was my daughter back, the girl who used to help me in my workshop and ask questions about how things worked. The legal proceedings took 8 months to resolve completely. Bradley initially tried to fight the charges, hiring an expensive defense attorney with money he somehow scraped together, probably borrowed against whatever assets the government hadn't seized yet. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and his lawyer eventually convinced him that a plea bargain was his only realistic option. During those 8 months, Amy and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when old tensions resurfaced, when she'd slip back into the entitled attitude she developed during her marriage, or when I'd remember the pain of being excluded from Christmas and feel my anger flare up again. But we kept talking, really talking, in ways we hadn't since she was a teenager. Amy got a job at a marketing firm downtown, making about a third of what she'd been used to spending when Bradley was funding their lifestyle with stolen money. She struggled at first with the adjustment, complaining about her tiny cubicle, her demanding boss, the fact that she had to pack her lunch every day instead of eating at expensive restaurants. "I used to spend more on a single dinner than I make in a day now," she said one evening as we prepared a simple meal together in my kitchen. "And how did that work out for you?" I asked, not unkindly, but not letting her romanticize the past either. Point taken. Gradually, she began to adapt to living within her means. She learned to shop at discount stores, to cook simple meals, to find entertainment that didn't cost a fortune. More importantly, she began to understand the value of money in a way she never had when it was just flowing endlessly from my accounts into her lifestyle. "I never realized how hard you worked for every dollar you gave us," she said one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset over Spokane. "When you're not earning it yourself, money just feels like numbers on a screen. That's exactly the problem. You never had to sacrifice anything for the lifestyle you were living, so you never understood what it was costing me. I understand now. Every time I look at my paycheck and realize how many hours I had to work to earn what we used to spend on wine in a single evening, I understand a little bit more." The breakthrough in our relationship came about 4 months after she moved back home. Amy had been working late on a particularly challenging project, and when she came home exhausted and frustrated, she didn't complain about her job or her circumstances. Instead, she talked about the satisfaction of solving problems, of contributing something meaningful to her company's success. "You know what's funny, Dad?" she said as we shared a pizza from the cheap place down the street. "I actually like working. I like having something that's mine, that I earned through my own effort." "That's not funny, sweetheart. That's normal. That's how most people feel about honest work." I guess I forgot what normal felt like. It was around that time that the government settlement check arrived, $137,000. Almost exactly what I'd calculated I'd lost over the years of supporting Bradley's criminal lifestyle. It was more money than I'd seen in one place since Linda's life insurance payout, and it felt like getting my life back. Amy was with me when I opened the envelope, and I watched her face carefully as she processed what the check represented. "That's a lot of money," she said quietly. "It's my money. Money I earned through 30 years of hard work, and then lost to a criminal who convinced my daughter I wasn't sophisticated enough to sit at his dinner table." She winced at the reminder, but she didn't argue or make excuses. "What are you going to do with it?" "Fix this house, for starters. New roof, new driveway, proper repairs that I've been putting off for years. Maybe take a vacation, something I haven't done since your mother died." "That sounds wonderful, Dad. You deserve all of that and more." I studied her face, looking for any sign of the old entitlement, any hint that she expected some of this money to come her way. But what I saw was genuine happiness for my good fortune, mixed with appropriate shame for her role in my losses. "Amy, I want you to know that this money is mine. I'm not going to be supporting your lifestyle anymore, not even partially. I wouldn't expect you to, and I wouldn't want you to. I need to build my own life now, based on what I can actually afford. Good. Because the most important thing you can do right now is prove to yourself that you can succeed on your own merits." That weekend, we celebrated my settlement by going out to dinner at a nice restaurant. Not the kind of place Bradley would have chosen with its pretentious menu and overpriced wine, but a comfortable family place where the portions were generous and the prices were reasonable. As we shared dessert and talked about Amy's plans for finding her own apartment, I realized that this was what I'd been missing during all those years of financial support and family drama. Simple time with my daughter, talking about normal things, enjoying each other's company without any hidden agendas or unspoken resentments. "Dad," she said as we were getting ready to leave, "I want to thank you again for everything you did. Not just the money over the years, but for having the courage to expose Bradley when I was too blind to see what he really was. You don't need to thank me for that, sweetheart. Yes, I do, because if you hadn't done what you did, I'd still be married to a criminal. I'd still be living a lie, thinking that material success was more important than the people who actually love me. And now I know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who uses you. I know the difference between real family and fake sophistication. And I know that my father is the strongest, smartest man I've ever known." As I drove Amy back to the house that night, I felt a contentment that had been missing from my life for years. The settlement money was important, but what meant more was having a real relationship with my daughter again, based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The next few months brought significant changes for both of us. I used part of the settlement to finally make the repairs my house had needed for years. New roof, repaved driveway, updated electrical system, fresh paint throughout the interior. It felt good to spend money on myself for once, to invest in my own comfort and security instead of someone else's fantasy lifestyle. Amy found her own apartment in February, a modest one-bedroom place about 15 minutes from my house. It wasn't much, but it was clean and affordable. And most importantly, it was hers. She'd earned the security deposit through her own work, and she'd be paying the rent with her own paychecks. The day she moved out, I helped her load her few possessions into my truck. She didn't have much minus some clothes, a few pieces of furniture I'd given her from the house, basic kitchen supplies. It was a far cry from the luxury she'd known during her marriage, but she seemed genuinely excited about having her own place. "Dad, are you sure you don't mind helping me move this stuff?" she asked as we loaded the last box. Amy, this is what family does. Real family helps each other without keeping score or expecting anything in return. I know I'm still learning what that looks like in practice. We spent the afternoon setting up her apartment, hanging pictures, arranging furniture, making the space feel like home. It reminded me of helping her move into her college dorm room years ago, except this time she was paying for everything herself. It's not much, she said as we finished organizing her small living room, but it's mine. That's the most important thing. Everything you see here, you earned through honest work. It feels different, knowing that when Bradley and I had all that expensive furniture and those fancy appliances, it never really felt like home. It felt like we were playing house with someone else's money. Because you were. You were living a lifestyle that was funded by theft and supported by lies. Amy's divorce was finalized in March, about the same time Bradley pled guilty to federal charges and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. She didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but I did. I wanted to see the end of this chapter, to watch Bradley Coleman finally face the consequences of his choices. He looked older in his orange jumpsuit, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the institutional clothing. When the judge read the sentence, Bradley showed no emotion, but I could see his defense attorney's shoulders slump with defeat. 14 years. He'd be 46 when he got out, middle-aged and unemployable in the financial services industry. His securities license would be permanently revoked, his professional reputation destroyed. His personal relationships shattered. It was a complete dismantling of the man who'd once told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for his family. After the hearing, I sat in my truck in the courthouse parking lot and called Amy to let her know it was over. How do you feel about it? She asked. Justice was served. Bradley will spend the next 14 years thinking about the choices he made and the people he hurt. Do you think he'll learn anything from it? That's not my concern anymore, Amy. My concern is making sure you learn from it. I have learned from it, Dad, more than I ever wanted to. Spring came early that year, and with it a sense of renewal that extended beyond just the changing seasons. Amy and I had dinner together once or twice a week, sometimes at my house, sometimes at hers, occasionally at restaurants when we wanted to celebrate something special. Our conversations were different now. We talked about her work, her plans for the future, books we were reading, projects I was working on around the house. Normal family conversations that weren't clouded by financial tensions or unspoken resentments. You know what I realized the other day? Amy said during one of our dinners at her apartment, she'd cooked the meal herself, a simple pasta dish that she'd learned to make from watching cooking videos online. What's that? I can't remember the last time we had a conversation where money came up. When I was married to Bradley, it seemed like every interaction with you was somehow connected to finances, either asking for help or justifying expenses or explaining why we needed more support. That's because your relationship with Bradley was fundamentally about money. My relationship with you is about family. I understand the difference now. It took losing everything to figure it out. But I understand. In May, Amy got promoted at her marketing firm, a recognition of her hard work and growing skills. The raise wasn't enormous, but it represented something important. Success earned through merit, rather than manipulation. I got the promotion, she told me excitedly when she called that evening. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. It feels amazing to accomplish something on my own, to have people recognize my work and my abilities rather than my connections or my husband's status. That's what real success looks like, Amy. Not borrowed prestige or lifestyle funded by other people's money, but achievements you can genuinely claim as your own. I want to take you out to celebrate, my treat to thank you for everything you've done to help me get my life back on track. I'd like that. But you don't need to thank me for helping you become the person you were always supposed to be. That weekend, we went to dinner at the same family restaurant where we'd celebrated my settlement. As we talked about Amy's promotion and her plans for the future, I realized that this was exactly what I'd been hoping for when I decided to expose Bradley's crimes. Not revenge, though that had certainly been satisfying. What I'd really wanted was my daughter back, the person she'd been before Bradley convinced her that family loyalty was less important than social status. The first Christmas after Bradley's sentencing was different from any we'd had in years. Amy came to my house on Christmas Eve bringing homemade cookies she'd baked herself and a bottle of wine that she'd carefully chosen based on online reviews rather than price. We spent the evening decorating my tree, something we hadn't done together since she was in high school. Remember when Mom used to insist that every ornament had to have a story? Amy said as she hung a small wooden angel that Linda had bought during our honeymoon in Colorado 30 years earlier. She said Christmas decorations weren't just about making things look pretty. They were about remembering the people and moments that mattered to us. I forgot that for a while. I got so caught up in having the perfect decorations, the perfect house, the perfect everything that I forgot the stories behind any of it. Bradley's idea of Christmas was about impressing people. Your mother's idea was about connecting with them. Amy was quiet for a moment, carefully positioning the angel on a branch where it would catch the light from the tree. Dad, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for months? Of course. Do you ever regret what you did to Bradley? 14 years in prison is a long time, and despite everything he put us through, he is still a human being. I thought about her question carefully before answering. It wasn't the first time I'd considered whether my actions had been proportionate to Bradley's crimes, whether justice and revenge were really the same thing. Amy, your husband threatened both of us, stole nearly $300,000 from me, committed federal crimes with other people's retirement savings, and put you at physical risk from dangerous people he owed money to. Do I regret stopping him before he could hurt more people? No, but do you regret how you did it? The public humiliation, the way you planned it all out so carefully? I gave Bradley multiple opportunities to change his behavior. I could have confronted him privately, could have threatened to expose him unless he left you alone and stopped taking my money. But men like Bradley don't respond to reasonable requests or private conversations. They only understand consequences, and consequences have to be public to be effective. So you don't think there might have been another way to handle it? Maybe. But I've been in business for 30 years, Amy. And I've learned that there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who respond to reason, and those who only understand power. Bradley was definitely the second type, and you made sure the consequences were severe enough to be meaningful. I made sure they matched the severity of his crimes. He didn't face those consequences because of my revenge plan, sweetheart. He faced them because he broke federal laws repeatedly and got caught doing it. Amy nodded slowly, understanding the distinction I was making. I guess what I'm really asking is whether you think justice and revenge are the same thing. No, they're not the same thing. Revenge is about making someone suffer because they hurt you. Justice is about making sure the consequences fit the crime and protecting other people from being victimized. Which one was this? Both, if I'm being honest. I wanted Bradley to pay for what he'd done to us, but I also wanted to make sure he couldn't do it to anyone else. The fact that I got personal satisfaction from his downfall doesn't make it revenge instead of justice. Christmas morning was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Amy and I had a simple breakfast together, exchanged modest gifts that we'd both carefully chosen and could comfortably afford. No expensive electronics, no designer clothes, no elaborate presents that created obligations or guilt. This feels like Christmas used to feel when I was a kid, Amy said as she opened a book I'd bought her about personal finance and investing. Like it's about the people you're with rather than the things you're giving or getting. That's exactly what your mother always wanted Christmas to be about. Being grateful for what we have and the people we love. I'm grateful for you, Dad. For everything you did to bring me back to reality, even though it was painful at the time. I'm grateful for you too, sweetheart. For being willing to learn from your mistakes and build something real instead of chasing fantasies. Later that afternoon, we drove to Linda's grave to leave the small wreath Amy had made from branches in my backyard. It had become a tradition since Linda's death, a way to include her in our Christmas celebration even though she was gone. I wish Mom could see how things turned out. Amy said as we stood beside the headstone in the quiet cemetery, she can see it in a way. Every time you choose family over status, every time you value character over money, every time you remember what she taught you about loyalty and respect, she's seeing it through you. Do you think she would approve of what you did to Bradley? Your mother was the kindest person I ever knew, but she was also fierce when it came to protecting her family. If Bradley had tried his manipulation tactics on her, he would have discovered that kindness and strength aren't mutually exclusive. As we drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in the 2 years since Bradley had first told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner. The man who'd made that decision was spending Christmas in a federal prison cell. The daughter who'd chosen to support that decision was now choosing to spend Christmas with her father. The house Amy had lost in the asset forfeiture was eventually sold at government auction for $480,000. Since it had been purchased with money that included my $60,000 down payment and funded by monthly payments I'd made for years, I received an additional settlement of $85,000 as part of the victim compensation process. I used that money to take the vacation I'd been putting off for years, not somewhere expensive or exotic, but a simple road trip through the national parks I'd always wanted to see, but never had time for when I was working 60-hour weeks to support Bradley's lifestyle. Amy asked if she could join me for part of the trip, and we spent a week together driving through Utah and Colorado, hiking easy trails and talking about everything except financial crimes and family drama. It was the kind of simple, relaxed time together that I'd been too stressed and too broke to enjoy for years. You know what's funny, Dad? Amy said as we sat on a bench overlooking the Grand Canyon, sharing a picnic lunch we'd packed that morning. What's that? This is the best vacation I've ever had, and it probably cost less than a single dinner at the restaurants Bradley used to take me to. What makes it better? It's real. Everything about it is genuine. The places we're seeing, the conversations we're having, the fact that we're both here because we want to be rather than because we're trying to impress someone or maintain some image. That's the difference between experiences and performances. Sweetheart, Bradley's whole life was a performance designed to impress other people. This is just us enjoying each other's company. The trip gave us time to talk about subjects we'd never really explored before. Amy's plans for the future, her growing interest in nonprofit work, her gradual understanding that success could be measured in ways that had nothing to do with money or social status. I've been thinking about going back to school, she told me as we drove through the mountains of Colorado, maybe getting a degree in social work or counseling. What's driving that interest? Going through everything with Bradley, losing everything I thought I wanted, having to rebuild my life from scratch, it gave me perspective on what really matters. I think I might be able to help other people who are dealing with similar situations. That sounds like meaningful work. It wouldn't pay much, at least not at first. But I'm learning that having enough is better than having everything if everything comes with strings attached. 6 months after our vacation, Amy made a decision that surprised me. She moved back to Spokane from Seattle, where she'd been considering taking a higher-paying marketing job to accept a position with a local nonprofit that helped families dealing with financial fraud and elder abuse. "Dad, I want to come home," she said when she called to tell me about the job offer. "Not to live with you again, but to be closer to family, to be part of a community where I can make a difference." "What about the Seattle job?" "I thought that was a great opportunity. It was a great opportunity to make more money and live in a bigger city. But I've learned that opportunities to do meaningful work with people you care about are more valuable than opportunities to accumulate things you don't really need." Amy's new job brought her into contact with other families who'd been victimized by financial crimes, and through her work, I began to understand that our situation wasn't unique. Elder financial abuse was more common than I'd realized, and the perpetrators were often family members or people in positions of trust. "You wouldn't believe how many stories I hear that sound just like ours," Amy told me during one of our weekly dinners. Adult children who take advantage of parents who love them, spouses who steal from their partners, financial advisors who view their clients as sources of easy money. What's the common thread? Trust. The victims are usually people who trust completely and give generously, and the perpetrators are people who see that trust as a weakness to be exploited rather than a gift to be treasured. That's a harsh way to look at human nature, maybe, but understanding it helps people protect themselves. The families I work with now, they're learning to set boundaries, to ask questions, to verify claims instead of just believing them. Through Amy's work, I met other people who'd gone through similar experiences. Men and women who'd supported adult children or spouses, only to discover that their generosity was being taken advantage of. The stories were depressingly familiar. Gradual financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, family loyalty being weaponized against the very people who'd shown it. But I also met people who'd successfully rebuilt their relationships with family members, who'd found ways to maintain love and support without enabling destructive behavior. It was possible to set boundaries without cutting off family entirely, to demand respect without withholding affection. The key, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, a family therapist who often worked with Amy's nonprofit, is understanding the difference between helping and enabling. Helping builds someone up and makes them stronger. Enabling tears them down and makes them dependent. How do you tell the difference? I asked during a support group meeting that Amy had convinced me to attend. Helping has limits and expectations. Enabling has neither. When you help someone, you expect them to eventually become self-sufficient. When you enable them, you accept that they'll always need your support. And if they refuse to become self-sufficient, then you're not helping them by continuing to provide support. You're preventing them from learning to stand on their own. It was a profound insight that changed how I thought about my own relationship with Amy. For years, I'd been enabling her dependency on my financial support while telling myself I was helping her build a better life. In reality, I'd been preventing her from learning to solve her own problems. The support group meetings became a regular part of my routine. Sitting in a circle with other people who'd been through similar experiences, sharing stories and strategies for rebuilding damaged relationships, I realized that my situation with Bradley and Amy wasn't an isolated tragedy but part of a larger pattern that affected thousands of families. "The hardest part," said Margaret, a 72-year-old woman whose son had stolen her entire retirement savings to fund a drug addiction, "is learning to love someone without rescuing them from the consequences of their choices." "Exactly," agreed Robert, whose daughter had convinced him to co-sign loans she had no intention of paying back. "We think we're showing love by protecting them from failure, but we're actually showing love by allowing them to learn from it." These conversations helped me understand that what I'd done to Bradley wasn't just personal revenge. It was a necessary intervention that had saved Amy from a lifetime of enabling a criminal's behavior while destroying her own character in the process. On the second anniversary of Bradley's sentencing, Amy organized a small dinner party at her apartment. It wasn't a celebration of his imprisonment, but rather a recognition of how far we'd both come since hitting rock bottom. The guest list was small. Amy, her supervisor from the nonprofit, and Dr. Martinez, who'd become a friend through our shared work with abuse victims. The conversation was about recovery, rebuilding, and the slow process of learning to trust again after betrayal. You know what I've learned from working with families like ours? Amy said as we shared a dessert she'd made herself. The victims often blame themselves for being too trusting, too generous, too loving. But those aren't character flaws. Those are character strengths that were exploited by people without character. The goal isn't to become cynical or suspicious. Dr. Martinez added, the goal is to learn how to maintain your generous nature while protecting yourself from people who would take advantage of it. How do you do that? Asked Jennifer, Amy's supervisor, who'd recently discovered that her own brother had been forging her signature on credit card applications. You verify before you trust, I said. You set clear boundaries and enforce them consistently. You recognize that love doesn't require enabling destructive behavior. And most importantly, Amy added, you remember that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish, it's responsible. When you allow people to take advantage of you, you're not just hurting yourself, you're enabling behavior that will eventually hurt them too. The conversation continued late into the evening, covering topics I'd never thought about before: the psychology of financial abuse, the warning signs of manipulation, the difference between temporary assistance and long-term dependency. It was educational in a way that felt empowering rather than victimizing. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much my understanding of family relationships had evolved. 2 years ago, I'd believed that love meant giving without limits, supporting without questions, trusting without verification. Now I understood that healthy love required boundaries, that real support meant helping people become independent rather than keeping them dependent. The next month brought an unexpected development. The private investigator who'd helped me gather evidence against Bradley called with news about the criminal investigation. Mr. Peterson, I thought you should know that Bradley Coleman's case has led to a broader investigation of his former employer. The SEC has found evidence of systemic problems at Meridian Financial Group. What kind of problems? Insufficient oversight of client accounts, inadequate background checks on employees, possible cover-ups of previous misconduct. It appears Bradley wasn't the only advisor there engaging in questionable practices. Are other victims coming forward? Dozens of them. The total amount of stolen funds is now estimated at over $3 million across multiple advisors. Your complaint was the catalyst that exposed the whole operation. The news was both satisfying and sobering. Bradley's crimes hadn't been isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of corruption that had affected dozens of families. By exposing him, I'd helped protect other people from similar victimization. There's something else you should know, Wright continued. Bradley Coleman has been cooperating with the federal investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's provided evidence against his former colleagues and supervisors. How much of a reduction? His sentence has been reduced from 14 years to 10 years, with the possibility of parole after 7 if he continues to cooperate fully. I felt a mixture of emotions about this development. Part of me was disappointed that Bradley would serve less time than originally sentenced. But another part recognized that his cooperation would help bring justice to other victims and prevent additional crimes. Mr. Peterson, can I ask how you feel about this development? I feel like justice is being served. Bradley is still facing serious consequences for his crimes, and his cooperation is helping protect other families from going through what we went through. That's a mature perspective. I'm not interested in revenge anymore, Mr. Wright. I'm interested in making sure this doesn't happen to other people. When I told Amy about Bradley's reduced sentence, she was quiet for a long moment before responding. 7 years is still a long time, Dad. He'll still lose the best years of his career, his reputation, his freedom. And when he gets out, he'll have to rebuild his entire life from nothing. How do you feel about that? I feel like it's appropriate. He made choices that hurt a lot of people, and now he's facing the consequences. But I also hope that someday he'll understand why those consequences were necessary and use his experience to become a better person. It was a level of emotional maturity that impressed me. The Amy who'd been married to Bradley would have been focused on how his reduced sentence affected her personally, whether it reflected poorly on her judgment, what people might think about her connection to him. The Amy who was sitting across from me now was thinking about justice, consequences, and the possibility of redemption. I'm proud of how you're handling this, sweetheart. I learned from watching you, Dad. You could have been bitter and vengeful about everything Bradley put us through, but you focused on protecting people and making sure justice was served. That's the kind of person I want to be. 3 years after Bradley's arrest, Amy met someone new. His name was Carl Morrison, and he was a teacher at the local high school where Amy's nonprofit sometimes conducted financial literacy workshops. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, with none of the whirlwind intensity that had characterized her marriage to Bradley. When Amy first mentioned Carl to me, I was immediately protective. Not possessive or controlling, but genuinely concerned about whether she'd learned enough from her previous experience to make better choices. "Tell me about him," I said when she brought up his name for the third time in 2 weeks. "He teaches history and coaches the debate team. He's been at the school for 8 years, owns a small house near the university, drives a 10-year-old Honda that he maintains himself. And what does he think about your work with abuse victims? He thinks it's important. He's seen some of his students dealing with financial stress at home, and he appreciates that someone is working to prevent families from being exploited. Has he asked you about your marriage to Bradley? We've talked about it." I told him the whole story, including the fact that my father had to expose my ex-husband's crimes to protect our family. I was curious about how Carl had reacted to that information. It's not every day someone tells you their ex-husband is serving time in federal prison for financial fraud. And how did he respond to that? He said he was impressed by your courage and proud of my work to help other families avoid similar situations. He also said he understood why it might make me cautious about trusting people with financial matters. Smart man. Amy brought Carl to dinner a few weeks later, and I spent the evening trying to get a sense of who he really was beneath the polite conversation and nervous energy that comes with meeting your girlfriend's father for the first time. Carl was 34 years old, average height, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about substance than style. He drove the Honda Amy had mentioned, a practical car that he'd clearly maintained well despite its age. His clothes were clean and pressed, but not expensive, the wardrobe of someone who lived within his means. During dinner, he asked thoughtful questions about my construction business, my experience rebuilding after Linda's death, my relationship with Amy. He listened carefully to the answers, asking follow-up questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite small talk. "Amy tells me you exposed some significant financial crimes a few years ago," he said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "That must have been a difficult decision. It was the right decision." Sometimes doing the right thing is difficult, but that doesn't make it optional. I imagine it took courage to go up against someone who had financial resources and professional connections. It took planning more than courage. I had good help from a private investigator and excellent evidence. Justice is easier to achieve when you document everything carefully. Amy said you recorded phone conversations and gathered financial records. That's very thorough. I studied Carl's face, looking for any sign that he was uncomfortable with the idea of a father-in-law who'd been willing to take such decisive action against someone who threatened his family. But what I saw was genuine respect and understanding. A man protects his family, Carl. That's not negotiable. I completely agree, sir. After Carl left that evening, Amy and I sat on the back porch talking about the dinner and my impressions of her new boyfriend. "What did you think of him, Dad?" "I think he's a good man. Honest, straightforward, living within his means, doing meaningful work. Very different from Bradley. That's exactly why I'm interested in him. Everything about Carl is genuine. He's not trying to impress me with money he doesn't have or status he hasn't earned. How does he treat you with respect? He listens to what I say, values my opinions, supports my work. When we go out, he suggests places we can both afford rather than expecting me to pay for expensive restaurants. And how do you feel about that? It feels honest. When Bradley took me to expensive places, it was about showing off, about maintaining an image. When Carl and I go to a simple restaurant or cook dinner together, it's about spending time with each other. That's a fundamental difference in priorities. Exactly. Carl is interested in building a relationship. Bradley was interested in maintaining a lifestyle. Over the following months, I watched Amy's relationship with Carl develop, and I was impressed by the healthy boundaries they maintained. They split expenses fairly, made decisions together, supported each other's goals without trying to change each other's fundamental character. When Carl proposed a year later, he asked for my blessing first, not because Amy needed my permission, but because he understood the importance of family approval and wanted to start their marriage with my support. "Mr. Peterson," he said during a private conversation in my workshop, "I'd like to ask Amy to marry me, and I wanted to talk to you about it first." "Why is my opinion important to you, Carl?" "Because family matters to Amy, and Amy matters to me. I want to be part of a family that includes you, not create a relationship that competes with your relationship with your daughter." It was exactly the right answer, spoken by someone who understood what Amy had learned through painful experience, that marriages work best when they strengthen family bonds rather than threatening them. You have my blessing, Carl. More than that, you have my respect for understanding what marriage should look like and what family means. Thank you, sir. That means everything to me. But But I need you to understand something about Amy's history and what she's been through. I'm listening. Amy learned some very hard lessons about trust, about the difference between people who love you and people who use you. She's stronger now because of what she went through, but she's also more cautious. If you ever make her choose between you and her family, you'll lose. I would never ask her to make that choice. I want to be part of her family, not a replacement for it. Good, because the man who tried that approach is currently serving time in federal prison. Carl smiled at that, understanding the warning beneath my words. Message received, Mr. Peterson. Amy said yes to his proposal, and they began planning a wedding that was everything her first wedding hadn't been. Modest, genuine, focused on the people who mattered rather than the impression it would make on others. The ceremony was held in the backyard of Carl's house with about 30 people in attendance. Amy wore a simple dress she'd bought off the rack and altered herself. Carl wore a suit he already owned. The decorations were flowers from local gardens, and the reception featured food prepared by friends and family. This is what a wedding should look like, Amy said as we danced to music played by Carl's brother on an acoustic guitar. Simple, honest, surrounded by people who actually care about us. Your mother would have loved this, sweetheart. I think she would have been proud that I finally learned the difference between a celebration and a performance. She definitely would have been proud of that. As I walked Amy down the short aisle in Carl's backyard, I thought about the contrast with her first wedding. That ceremony had been held at the Davenport Hotel with 200 guests, an orchestra, imported flowers, and a reception that cost more than many people make in a year. It had been beautiful in its way, but it had also been hollow, focused more on impressing Bradley's social circle than celebrating Amy's happiness. This wedding was the opposite. Simple, intimate, genuine. Every person there had been chosen because they mattered to Amy and Carl, not because they needed to be impressed or included for business reasons. When the minister asked who was giving Amy away, I said, "Her mother and I are pleased to welcome Carl into our family." It was a small change from the traditional response, but it captured something important. This wasn't about losing Amy to another man, but about gaining a son who understood what family really meant. The reception was held under string lights in Carl's backyard, with tables borrowed from the high school where he taught. The food was simple but delicious, prepared by people who loved Amy and Carl rather than catered by strangers. The conversations were real, focused on shared memories and hopes for the future, rather than polite small talk about business or travel. "You know what I love about this?" said Dr. Martinez, who'd become a close family friend through our work with abuse victims. "Everyone here is genuinely happy for Amy and Carl. There's no undercurrent of competition or judgment or social positioning. That's what happens when you invite people based on love rather than obligation," I replied. Later that evening, as Amy and Carl were saying goodbye to their guests, Amy pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Dad, I want to thank you for everything you did to make this possible. I didn't do anything to make this happen, sweetheart. You made the choices that led to this. But you saved me from Bradley. If you hadn't exposed him when you did, I'd probably still be married to a criminal, living a life based on lies and stolen money. Maybe, but you're the one who chose to learn from that experience instead of being bitter about it. You're the one who chose to do meaningful work helping other families. You're the one who chose Carl over someone who might have offered more money or status. I chose love over everything else, just like you taught me. Just like your mother taught both of us." As Amy and Carl drove away for their honeymoon, a simple camping trip to Yellowstone that fit their budget and their values, I reflected on how much had changed since that December evening when Amy first told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner. The man who'd made that decision was serving time in federal prison. The daughter who'd supported that decision was now married to someone who understood that family came first. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their destructive choices. 6 months after Amy's wedding, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Bradley, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Institution where he was serving his sentence. At first, I considered throwing it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the careful handwriting of someone who'd had plenty of time to think about what he wanted to say. It wasn't an attempt to justify his actions or minimize his crimes. Instead, it was an acknowledgement of what he'd done and an attempt to understand why. "Mr. Peterson," the letter began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to request it. I'm writing because I've had 3 years to think about what I did to you and to Amy, and I finally understand the damage I caused." The letter went on to describe Bradley's time in prison, his work with a counselor to understand his gambling addiction, his gradual recognition of how his behavior had affected everyone around him. It was a humbling document that revealed a level of self-awareness I hadn't thought him capable of. "I used to think you were jealous of my success, that you couldn't understand the sophisticated world Amy and I lived in." Bradley wrote, I was wrong about everything. You were trying to protect your daughter from a man who was destroying himself and taking her down with him. I was too arrogant and too addicted to see what I was becoming. The letter described his realization that the money I'd sent hadn't been helping them build a life together, but had instead been enabling his gambling addiction, while he committed crimes with other people's retirement savings. He'd finally understood that his sophisticated lifestyle had been built on theft and lies. I know now that when you exposed my crimes, you weren't just seeking revenge. You were performing an intervention that saved Amy's life and probably mine as well. If I'd continued on that path, I would have eventually owed money to people who would have killed us both. The most surprising part of the letter was his acknowledgement of how he'd treated me personally. I convinced myself that you weren't good enough for our social circle, that your working-class background and straightforward manner were somehow embarrassing. I was wrong about that too. You have more honor and integrity than anyone I knew in my professional life. You earned everything you had through honest work, while I was stealing everything I had from people who trusted me. Bradley went on to describe his work in the prison's financial literacy program, where he taught other inmates about the warning signs of fraud and addiction. It was, he said, his attempt to make amends for the damage he'd caused. I can't undo what I did to you and Amy, Mr. Peterson. I can't give back the years of stress and financial hardship I caused you, but I can try to prevent other people from becoming victims of men like me. The letter concluded with something I hadn't expected: genuine gratitude. Thank you for stopping me before I destroyed more lives than I already had. Thank you for saving Amy from the consequences of my choices, and thank you for showing me what real strength and character look like. I hope someday to be worthy of the respect I demanded but never earned. I read the letter twice before showing it to Amy, uncertain how she would react to hearing from the man who'd nearly destroyed her life. What do you think about it? I asked after she'd finished reading. I think he's finally telling the truth, she said quietly. About what he did, about why you had to stop him, about the danger we were both in. Does it change how you feel about what happened? It confirms what I've come to understand over the past 3 years. You didn't destroy my marriage, Dad. You saved me from a marriage that was already destroying itself. And how do you feel about Bradley now? Amy was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter in her hands. I feel sorry for him. Not because he's in prison, he earned that, but because he wasted so many years of his life chasing things that didn't matter while destroying the things that did. Do you think he's genuinely changed? I think prison has given him perspective he never had before. Whether that translates into permanent change when he gets out, I don't know. But I hope it does, for his sake, and for the sake of anyone who might be in his life in the future. A few weeks later, Amy asked me an unexpected question during one of our regular dinners at her house. Dad, would you be interested in speaking at some of the workshops I conduct for abuse victims? I think your perspective as someone who successfully exposed financial crimes might be helpful to other families. What would I talk about? How to recognize the warning signs, how to gather evidence, how to work with law enforcement and regulatory agencies. Practical information that could help people protect themselves. I thought about it for a moment. The idea of sharing my experience with other families who might be going through similar situations was appealing, but I wasn't sure I was qualified to give advice. I'm not an expert, Amy. I'm just someone who got tired of being taken advantage of and decided to do something about it. That's exactly why your perspective would be valuable. You're not a professional investigator or attorney or counselor. You're a regular person who found himself in an impossible situation and figured out how to solve it. What kind of information do people usually want to know? Everything you learned, how to document financial transactions, how to record conversations legally, how to work with private investigators, how to coordinate with regulatory agencies. The practical stuff that most people don't know how to do. I agreed to try it, and a month later I found myself standing in front of a group of 20 people who'd all been victimized by financial crimes committed by family members or trusted advisors. Their stories were heartbreakingly familiar. Adult children who'd stolen inheritance money, spouses who'd hidden gambling addictions, financial advisors who'd made unauthorized trades. The most important thing to understand, I told them, is that documentation is everything. Without evidence, you have opinions. With evidence, you have a case that law enforcement and regulatory agencies can act on. I walked them through the process I'd used to expose Bradley. Gathering financial records, recording conversations, working with a private investigator, coordinating the timing of complaints to different agencies. It was practical information that could help them protect themselves and recover their losses. But the real lesson isn't about investigative techniques, I concluded. It's about boundaries. The reason people can take advantage of us financially is that we love them more than we protect ourselves. Learning to maintain both love and boundaries is the key to preventing this from happening again. After the presentation, several people approached me with specific questions about their situations. I found that I could offer practical advice based on my experience, guidance that might help them avoid some of the mistakes I'd made along the way. One woman, whose adult son had forged her signature on multiple loans, asked me how I'd found the courage to take action when it meant potentially destroying my relationship with Amy. The hardest part wasn't finding courage, I told her. It was accepting that the relationship I thought I had with my daughter was already destroyed. I was just enabling someone who was using both of us. Real love sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. But what if my son never forgives me for exposing him? Then he's telling you that he values your money more than your relationship. And that's information you need to have. These conversations reinforced what I learned through my own experience, that financial abuse thrives in families where love is confused with enabling, where victims are afraid to set boundaries because they might lose relationships that are already dysfunctional. On the 5th anniversary of Bradley's sentencing, Amy and Carl invited me to dinner to celebrate what Amy called Independence Day, the day our family was freed from financial manipulation and emotional abuse. 5 years ago today, Amy said as we raised glasses of the reasonably priced wine Carl had chosen, "Dad saved me from a life built on lies. I didn't understand it at the time, but it was the most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. You saved yourself, sweetheart. I just made it impossible for you to keep making the same mistakes." What's amazing to me, Carl added, is how much stronger your relationship became after you stopped enabling each other. Most families would have been torn apart by what you went through. Most families don't learn the difference between love and enablement, I replied. We were lucky enough to figure it out before it was too late. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since that December night when Amy first told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. The man who'd manipulated that decision was serving time in federal prison, having lost everything he'd stolen and more. The daughter who'd supported that decision had built a new life based on her own merits and was now helping other families avoid similar traps. And I had learned that sometimes the most difficult decisions are also the most necessary ones. The house felt different now, too. The repairs I'd made with the settlement money had transformed it from a neglected reminder of financial stress into a comfortable home where I enjoyed spending time. More importantly, it was a place where Amy and Carl felt genuinely welcome, where family gatherings were about connection rather than obligation. 6 months later, I received another letter from Bradley. This one was shorter, informing me that he'd been granted early parole and would be released in 6 months. He'd found a job with a nonprofit organization that helped former inmates reintegrate into society, work that would use his financial knowledge in a constructive way. I wanted you to know that I don't plan to contact Amy or try to reinsert myself into her life, he wrote. She's built something good with Carl, and she deserves to be free from reminders of the damage I caused. But I also wanted you to know that the work I'm doing now is directly inspired by the lesson you taught me, that real strength comes from protecting people, not exploiting them. I showed this letter to Amy as well, and she responded with the same mature perspective she'd developed over the years. "I'm glad he's found meaningful work," she said, "and I'm glad he understands that the best thing he can do for me is to stay out of my life." Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't exposed him when I did? I know exactly what would have happened. We'd still be living that lie, probably with even more debt and even more danger. I'd still be married to a criminal, and you'd still be funding it while being treated like garbage. And now we're all where we should be. You're comfortable and respected. I'm married to a good man who values family, and Bradley is learning to contribute something positive to the world instead of just taking from it. On Amy's 32nd birthday, she and Carl announced that they were expecting their first child. The news filled me with a joy I hadn't expected. The prospect of becoming a grandfather and watching Amy raise a child with the values she'd learned through hard experience. This baby will grow up understanding the difference between love and enabling, Amy said as we celebrated with cake she'd baked herself in the kitchen of the modest house she and Carl owned together. They'll know that family means loyalty and respect, not just shared DNA. They'll also know their grandfather as someone who protects his family when it matters, Carl added. That's a valuable lesson for any child to learn. As I looked around the table at my daughter and son-in-law, thinking about the grandchild who would soon join our family, I realized that this was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge against Bradley, though that had been satisfying. Not recovery of my money, though that had been important. What I'd really been fighting for was the chance to have a genuine family again, built on respect and honesty rather than manipulation and financial dependence. My name is Harold Peterson. I'm 58 years old, and I learned that sometimes the people you love will disappoint you, take advantage of your generosity, and make you feel like you don't matter. When that happens, you have a choice. You can keep enabling their destructive behavior, or you can love them enough to let them face the consequences of their choices. I chose love. Real love, the kind that protects instead of enables, the kind that demands respect while offering forgiveness, the kind that builds something lasting instead of something convenient. And in the end, that made all the difference. True strength isn't about getting revenge on people who hurt you. It's about having the courage to stop enabling their destructive behavior, even when it costs you relationships you thought you valued. The difference between loving someone and enabling them is this: love helps people become better versions of themselves, while enabling allows them to stay broken while making you pay the price for their choices.